get involved in praying to demon spirits?
A fellow that had been on a particular ship with me, he told me, "Hey, I got something fantastic to tell you." He said, "I am affiliated with people that speak with the spirits of the dead. How would you like to talk to the spirit of your dead mother?" And I was shocked. I was shocked. He said, "You wouldn't be afraid of talking to the spirit of your dead mother, would you?" Well, I said, "I'll tell you what, I would have to give that some thought, because it's something I never thought about before in my life."
Most of us probably haven't. A little afraid of something like that.
Well, he says, you know, it's written all over your face. You're afraid of going to a seance. But he says, "I know you. You're going to come. Go to a seance." So one Saturday evening, we were in the place. It was the very first time. Very beautiful place. The medium was a lady. She had a gorgeous new home in Montreal. And there were about 20 invited guests there, which I was one of them. And she communicated with the spirits for there's different people there. And they were telling them what the spirit said. One man said, "I would like to talk to my friend that died 6 months ago. But I don't want him to appear. Just want to talk to him. Because he says, I don't trust you talking to my friend for me." So the medium says, "Let me inquire of the spirit." "Yeah, the spirit will talk with you." And that big masculine voice was heard in the place. It says, "Hi, Frank. It's nice of you to ask for me to talk with you." And they had a little chat. And after it was over, Frank says, "This is the greatest thing on earth, to be able to talk with the spirits of the dead." Then the medium said, "We have a very special surprise tonight for you people. A spirit will manifest itself openly here in a few minutes. And it's like a big gust of wind hit the building. And right through the wall. Now the lights weren't terribly bright, but they were like living room lights. A couple of floor lamps, and maybe some of these. And that translucent being seemed to come right out of the wall.
How did you feel right at that moment?
It's almost like my heart stopped a little bit. Very weird feeling. So it was a lady in a beautiful evening gown, swirling. And she said to Mary, "My dear sister, you are so wonderful to have asked for me." And Mary fainted and fell right off her chair on the floor. And a couple of guys jumped up and picked her up, and it's gone. And that was the beginning of it.
That's how you got into it.
Yeah, that's the way I got into it. After a while, you see, there's something interesting about the human mind. You can adjust an awful lot of stuff. You can adjust to a lot of things that would terrify you to begin with. After a while, they become common and ordinary.
So you mean contact with the supernatural can become commonplace and ordinary and doesn't bother anybody?
Yeah.
In other words, the more that you do it, you're not uncomfortable.
That's right.
It's just not an uneasy feeling.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about it?
Then I got into a secret society that worshiped the spirits, you see.
Now how is that different from the seance, Roger?
It happens that the seance are not involving in many ways. But when you get into a secret society of spirit worshippers, then, and especially when you're invited there by the direction of the higher-ups in the spirit world, you never get out of there alive. And this is exactly what my friend and I were up against. We didn't know anything about it. And there was a very, very popular big band leader.
Jazz musician?
Band, yeah, very famous. And one night we went to one of these seances, and he was with his wife.
So Roger, you're at this restaurant. What happened?
We sat there, and we had our favorite alcoholic beverages, And as we talk, the band leader says, he says, I want power. I go right to the source of power. And he says, how do you think that I became famous the way that I am? And I said, you must have had some good luck. Well, he says, there's no such thing as good luck. He says, there's either some power working for you somewhere, or you don't get ahead in this world. Not in my type of occupation. So it went from there. We got talking about spirit worship.
Did it intrigue you? Or did it make you want to find out more about what exactly he was talking about?
Yeah. So he said the supposed spirits of the dead that you're talking with are demon spirits. You're fallen angels. You're beautiful beings.
Just set it out, just like
Oh
that.
yeah.
It didn't make you uneasy when he said they were...
Well, you know, it shocked you.
Called the Book of the Cave of Treasures. It tells of fallen angels and the bastard children called Nephilim. God destroyed the Nephilim's bodies and doomed them to wander the earth in an invisible dimension, and they are still terrifying men. In our modern paradigm, they are known as demon spirits. The word demon is from the Greek language and means knowledge. The demon knowledge is greater than man's. The Bible tells of their creation in Genesis chapter 6, and they were the cause of the destruction of life on earth. The Apocrypha and early Jewish writings expound on these evil spirits. The Book of Enoch tells of their giant stature and how they manipulated the genetics of man and animals in every imaginable way. In other words, no stone was left unturned in their evil experiments.
The answer to all this and the clue to this cosmic riddle may be found in the ancient book of Genesis. And back there in chapter 6, we are told of a very amazing and bizarre event. The sons of God saw the daughters of men and saw that they were beautiful, and they lusted after them. And then we read they married them and sired children from them. For the past 1500 years, most scholars, including evangelical scholars, have interpreted the sons of God as the good sons of Seth, and the daughters of men as the wicked daughters of Cain. They've adopted that interpretation because the other one is so bizarre and outlandish. The ancient interpretation, and in my opinion the correct one, is that the sons of God were demonic beings or fallen angels, and that they came down to earth, they lusted after the daughters of men, they married them, and produced this amazing progeny, this hybrid progeny of the Nephilim. And the very word Nephilim does not mean giants. It comes from the root Nephal, fallen ones. The early Christian fathers in the first 4 centuries, men like Irenaeus, Tertullian, Ambrose, for 400 years they knew no other interpretation except that the sons of God were angelic beings. Josephus, the cosmopolitan Jewish historian, says the same thing.
Many of the artifacts that they've left us resemble what we would call today a modern-day gray alien. Large bulbous head, large eyes, spindly limbs, very thin bodies.
These beings are demonic, not aliens from another planet. They live here in an invisible dimension, sentenced by God. They are not here to help, they are here to destroy. Ufologists point out there are many ancient drawings and cave art depicting them, and their flying machines. I believe some of this is true. But we do have to be careful about our imagination.
A lot relates to how you interpret the signs that we see. Is a sketch on the wall an alien in a space helmet? Is it a diving helmet? Or is it just a decorative piece of work from a science fiction writer of several thousand years ago? So the further back you go, the harder it is to interpret.
In all of the classical ancient cultures that we know of, there have been descriptions of unusual aerial phenomena. And in many cases, these can be interpreted as some kind of craft piloted by intelligent beings.
Skeptical scholars and scientists are critical of these subjects, and contributed to imagination. What they do not tell you is imagination is a key ingredient in any scientific exploration. Just ask any scientist for proof of the Big Bang, or the evolution of man from apes. There is no rigorous proof, they are only guessing and using their imagination, something they hide in an illusion of knowledge. But we must remember that skepticism is very important in any research. We cannot be gullible. I find about 80% of UFOs, demons or paranormal activity have a definable explanation. The following is a clip of 3 physicists discussing their theories about the Big Bang, and their use of imagination.
And the biggest secret about our universe. What caused the Big Bang?
I think people get the wrong impression about scientists in that they think in an orderly, rigid way from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. What really happens is that often you make some imaginative leap, which at the time may seem nonsensical. When you capture the field at those stages, it looks like poetry in which you are imagining without yet proving.
Paul, Bert and me were sitting together on the train and just free associating.
One of us, maybe it was me, began by saying, well, why can't we make a universe out of collision? And Neil sort of pitching in and saying, well, if you did that, then you could create all the matter and radiation of the universe. So we had this conversation, one of us completing the sentences of the other, in which we kind of just let our imaginations go.
And as we went along, at least I learned more and more about how it might be possible to have these brain collisions produce all of the effects of the early universe. And in particular, it's just easy to do with my hands. When they collide, you might have a big bang.
Right from the horse's mouth, we hear for ourselves the importance of imagination. When I refer to skeptical scientists, it's important to remember there is no united group of scientists. There are 1,000 different groups and many bitterly divided. I choose not to defend the creationists either. They are splintered as well, and many of these groups are self-defensive, to the point of neglecting their pursuit of the truth. The search for the truth is complex. You are fighting your own bias, and a plethora of worldly agendas.
Ancient people saw weird things in the sky, and they were convinced that these were symbols of God's intentions. Their lives were controlled by the gods. And in every case that I am aware of, there is an alternate explanation. It could have been a meteor, which they didn't understand. It could have been some ball lightning. It could have been any kind of thing that was just totally unknown to primitive man. And so they always interpret these things in terms of supernatural.
Despite scientific skepticism, the history of human affairs contain many curious examples, not only reports of flying vehicles, but the presence of evil spirits. During his invasion of Asia, the mighty leader, Alexander the Great, is chronicled as witnessing UFOs. These incidents were officially written by his personal historian, Callisthenes of Olynthus. While crossing a river in 329 before Christ, Alexander and his men observed what is described as gleaming silver shields in the sky. The objects repeatedly swooped down on a column of soldiers, scattering men and horses in a panic. 7 years later, while attacking the Phoenician city of Tyre in the eastern Mediterranean, Alexander again encounters UFOs. Recorded by observers on both sides of the conflict, one of the objects shoots down a beam of light at the city wall, which crumbles into dust, allowing Alexander and his troops to easily breach the defenses and take the city. These flying silver shields description fit perfectly with the common UFO report of flying saucers. The beam of light is also significant because it corresponds to the many thousands of modern-day reports, especially the abduction accounts. In my documentary, The Nephilim, I unveil the evidence which connects the Greek gods with what the Hebrews call evil spirits, now called demons by Christians. The very same demigods in Genesis chapter 6, which were born of fallen angels and earthly women. It is my suggestion these same spirits, which Alexander witnessed, and known today as the alien greys, are responsible for UFO sightings, abductions and worldwide phenomena. Socrates openly admits he is guided by a demon and worships it daily. Alexander, a student of Socrates, later in his life even proclaimed himself as a god. He constantly counseled with spiritualists, Diogenes, and Sibyls at Delphi. It is obvious these demons were guiding the Greeks to rule the world, their original modus operandi. They physically intervened in the Battle of Tyre to fulfill their promise to Alexander. Early Jewish writings state they have been stripped of their apparel, go naked and have horrible faces.
You know, do UFOs have occult or demonic origins? But the idea of actually digging into the whole story from a governmental perspective, you're quite right, it isn't something, you know, I never really anticipated getting into at all.
Were you reluctant to go this way? You know, I see you at occasional UFO conferences. Yeah. You're always so erudite and careful about your research and everything, and it would seem to me that if you were to tell your colleagues, hey, I'm researching whether UFOs are demonic, well, let's explore that for a second, because it sort of becomes an underlying theme in the book, is that the possibility that these agents and this agency that was investigating this stuff had somehow tried to establish communication, had opened some sort of a door, a portal, a window, and that things came in and that shouldn't have come in. Why don't you talk about that in an overall sense, and then we'll get into some specifics.
Yeah, sure. This was basically the idea that, you know, rather than sort of nuts and bolts spacecraft landing, as we said, on the White House lawn, the idea was that people, literally within the Defense Department, were sort of consulting ancient texts and books on demonology and using archaic rites and rituals to quite literally summon up these entities that, you know, the UFO research community calls the Greys. You know, they weren't trying to contact them by radio or whatever, you know, radio waves or anything like that. It was literally, you know, invoking and using ancient rites and rituals. And the story was, you know, that they didn't necessarily come through in nuts and bolts craft. The group actually came to believe over time that, you know, this was more of like a hologram type thing, that these weren't sort of flesh and blood entities. They were almost like a demonic intelligence, if you like, that in some cases weren't even sort of, you know, had physical form, although they could manifest physically in some respects, that the group believed. So in other words, the idea was that this portal was opened. Now, by portal, you know, in simplistic terms, we're talking about a gateway to another realm that some people would quite possibly correctly, you know, would suggest was like another dimension, but the group concluded it was literally like a doorway or portal to hell, and allowed these entities to come through in like a deceptive mode of extraterrestrials. And then it was a case of, well, you know, we can actually learn quite a bit if we can harness their powers, but should we try it? Can we actually take on the forces of hell in some sort of Faustian pact? That was literally the way it was looked at. But again, you know, based on belief systems, one man's alien is another man's demon. You know, that is the sort of the basic background as to how and why they were looking at this. It was a case of trying to contact these entities, open doorways, and then try and militarize any powers or skills that might be developed from liaising with these entities.
Now, Ray, your friend Ray, Anglican priest that he is, said that there is some sort of a focus on Christianity as opposed to other kinds of religion from whoever these entities are. Why don't you go explain that to us?
Yeah, well, I mean, Ray's done a lot of research into this area, and certainly, you know, this is one of the things that why there was so much research done for the book. You know, it covered 4 years, because I'll be the first to admit, you know, I'm not a particularly religious person. You know, I don't have any problem with what people believe at a religious level, but, you know, not being someone who sort of has that background, it required a lot of research. And so, you know, that's why the interviews were quite extensive for the book. And Ray basically has done a lot of research and found a number of cases where these sort of so-called alien entities, whatever they are, had made denials about Christianity when they were speaking to, you know, various abductees, contactees, whoever, and claiming, you know, that Christianity isn't really the truth behind what's going on. And what Ray found was that in a number of cases it was always Christianity that was targeted rather than any other religions. It was always that one that was being criticized, and Ray kind of perceived it as being as he saw it, sort of the two true forces, good and evil, the Christian belief system and the minions of Satan squaring up against each other, and he felt that the denial of Christianity by these entities was evidence that they're probably not extraterrestrial because they were focusing on just one religion.
Okay, we're getting into the good stuff now with Nick Redfern talking about a secret government group that was studying demons disguised as ETs.
They came across a very disturbing story of a man named Paul Garrett. Now, Paul Garrett was a guy who was involved in a car accident in the late 1960s in California and had a near-death experience, and he actually wrote to his local newspaper, and I've got the clipping from the newspaper, and he's basically, a letter to the editor talking about this amazing experience he'd had this accident, and literally, I guess, died, but he was brought back on the operating table and had one of these